Africa is a continent known for its diversity of people. With many cultures and lifestyles ranging from modern urban dwellers to a variety of rural and traditional modes of living. Africa is also known for its grasslands and savannas that are home to an amazing collection of large animals. Animals that are from a time 10,000 years ago when megafaunas of elephants and lions roamed much of the world. But it is much more. In this part, we will look at the basic geographical facts about Africa, see how it divides into regions, and look at some of the continent's prominent geographical features. What are the main facts about Africa? Did you know that Africa is the second largest of the continents? Its landmass constitutes 20% of the Earth's terrestrial surface. Its 11,700,000 square miles, or 30,300,000 square kilometers, are home to nearly 1 billion people. Africa is bordered by oceans on two sides, the Atlantic on the west and the Indian Ocean on the east. Where the two great bodies of water come together is the famous Cape of Good Hope. The Mediterranean Sea separates Africa from Europe, and the Red Sea separates it from Asia. Africa's 19,000 miles, or 31,000 kilometers of coastline is relatively unbroken. Its Sahara Desert is so large it could hold the United States. Africa contains some of the world's great rivers, including the longest, the Nile River. It is the only continent that straddles the equator and is bracketed by the Tropic of Cancer to the north and the Tropic of Capricorn to the south. Africa is the cradle to the human race, the place where early humanoid species first appeared. It is also the site of many great civilizations, such as the ancient Egyptian and Nubian cultures that thrived along the Nile River 2,000 to 6,000 years ago. Today, Africa's people are divided into two groups: a largely Caucasian Semitic people who are descendants of the ancient Hebrews, Akkadians, and Phoenicians, commonly known as Arabs, who occupy the northern third of the continent. The southern two-thirds is made up primarily of people called Black Africans. Africa boasts one of the world's great cities, Cairo, Egypt, with 12 million inhabitants. Cairo is one of the world's economic power centers and has a rich cultural heritage. What most people don't know is that Africa contains many countries, 46 in all. Geographers divide Africa into 6 regions, which share physical and cultural features. Now let's look at these regions. Egypt and Sudan once formed part of the ancient Egyptian Empire. 4 other countries make up the rest of Northeast Africa. A coast along the Red Sea unites this region. The Nile River flows through this region. It also has some of Africa's richest farmland. Northwest Africa is perched along the Mediterranean Sea. The Arab countries of Libya, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and Western Sahara comprise this region. It has large coastal populations that share many historical and cultural features with its European neighbors to the north. Inland from the coast is a desert with abundant oil resources. South of this region is West Africa. It is split by desert to the north and tropical rainforest to the south. Today, it is one of the most rapidly developing regions. It contains Nigeria, Africa's most populated country, and the important oceanic port states of Senegal, Liberia, and Ghana. There are 11 other countries in this region. Central Africa is largely made up of countries set in the tropical rainforest. Zaire is Africa's third largest country, and Cameroon is home to over 200 ethnic groups, including Pygmies. All of the countries in this region are clustered around the equator. The countries of Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, and other small states form the East African region. People come from all over the world to view this region's animal herds. Southern Africa is the last of the continent's regions. Two of Africa's richest countries are found in this region, Zimbabwe and South Africa. Other countries of this region are rich in natural resources and agriculture. Part of this region is marked by the grasslands and savannas that support the same large wild animal herds that are found in East Africa. But it also contains the Kalahari and Namibia deserts. Off the coast of Mozambique is the island of Madagascar, which was once attached to the continent of Africa. Madagascar is the fourth largest island in the world. The most dominant feature of Africa is the Sahara Desert. It is a place where the sun rules supreme. At times, temperatures reach over 150 degrees Fahrenheit or 66 degrees Celsius. The Sahara is the largest desert in the world, larger than most countries. East to west, it is more than 2,500 miles or 4,000 kilometers across. From north to south, it is approximately 900 miles or 1,500 kilometers long. But the southern edge of the Sahara itself is always shifting due to natural variations in climate, particularly the amount of rainfall in a year, so no one knows exactly how big it is. Most of the Sahara consists of gravel plains and low-lying mountain ranges, but it is best known for the vast stretches of sand that take up only 10% of its area. Often the sand wells up into spectacular dunes that are like waves on the ocean. Ever shifting, growing, and receding, dunes can reach up to 200 feet or 61 meters in height and can stretch for hundreds of miles. The weather across the desert is hot and dry, frequently subject to violent sandstorms. Throughout the Sahara, there are oases, places where precious water is found in the form of springs and wells. As we have mentioned, far to the south is the Kalahari Desert. The Sahara and the Kalahari are both equidistant from the equator. Later, we shall see how Africa's climates are a mirror image of themselves. Over 50 million years ago, Africa was joined to the continent of South America, but by a process known as continental drift, the two countries were separated by the Earth's internal tectonic forces. Africa remains in relative isolation from other continental and oceanic plates. As a result, Africa has become an old and stable continental platform that is not subject to many of the forces that produce earthquakes and volcanoes. Therefore, there is little uplifting to generate spectacular mountain ranges and peaks. In fact, most of Africa is a great rolling plateau, the exception being the highlands of East Africa. It is where the highest peaks in Africa, Mount Kenya and Mount Kilimanjaro, rise up. Not far from these mountain peaks is a geographical feature where tectonic forces are pulling the continent into two parts. It is known as the Great Rift Valley, and it is over 6,000 miles or 9,700 kilometers long. But in East Africa, its southern terminus, it is most pronounced. The Great Rift Valley contains some of Africa's largest lakes, such as Victoria, Tanganyika, and Nyassa. The Rift Valley lakes are source waters for a number of Africa's great rivers, including the world's longest river, the Nile. The Nile River, which runs from south to north, is 4,200 miles or 7,000 kilometers long. Unlike most of the world's major rivers, the Nile flows through desert land. The Nile is actually sourced by two rivers, the White Nile and the Blue Nile, which eventually join up and flow into the Mediterranean Sea. The Nile River system flows through 9 countries and is literally the lifeblood of tens of millions of people. In a desert where water is a precious commodity, the Nile Valley has sustained a rich agricultural base that has allowed a series of civilizations to flourish for over 6,000 years. The rich delta where the Nile flows into the Mediterranean is the cradle to Western civilization. What are Africa's other major rivers? They are the Congo and Zambezi, which are also sourced in the Rift Valley, and West Africa's Niger River. Now let's look at Africa's climates. Africa is an incredible array of tropical, semi-arid, and arid climates. The continent's climates are arranged primarily in east-west bands. On the northern and southern tips are Mediterranean climates, climates that are mild year-round. Next, desert climates are found in both the northern and southern third of the continent. Here, rainfall is low and it's hot year-round. The middle of Africa is marked by a tropical climate on the west, where days are consistently hot and humid. To the east, a semi-arid savanna climate is found. It is marked by seasonal dry and wet periods. Vegetatively, the savanna is made up of grasslands scattered with medium-sized trees. As we can see, the equator, like a mirror, divides the continent into two climatologically identical images, just as a real mirror produces two identical but opposite mirror images. An interesting observation is that the continent is devoid of any cold seasons. There are no Arctic or temperate climates in Africa. In the area of the savanna climate, we find one of Africa's most fascinating ecosystems. Here, there are more large, free-ranging mammals than anywhere else on Earth. We can see such animals as giraffes, elephants, Cape buffalo, and a wide assortment of antelope. Predators such as lions and hyenas still roam free. Such large mammal populations once existed on all continents in most ecosystems. But human intervention has turned their habitats into agricultural lands. Only 50 years ago, herds of wild animals roamed over this land. Outside of oasis, the desert ecosystem is one that has a low carrying capacity for life. The few plants that grow here have adaptations in the form of long and massive root systems. In the tropical ecosystem, we find a lush forest canopy with a large assortment of birds and primates. Its rivers are home to the famous African crocodiles. Much of Africa's hot interior climates and low-lying topography combine to produce areas that are inhospitable to human life. Consequently, most of Africa's population lives along its extensive oceanic coastline and eastern highlands. We will learn more about this in Part 2. One, Africa has A. Many countries, B. Few countries, C. An average number of countries. 2. Africa was once joined to South America. A. True. B. False. 3. Africa is one of the newer continents. A. True. B. False. 4. Africa is the A. Largest continent, B. Second largest continent, C. Third largest continent. 5. An animal found in the desert is the A. Baboon, B. Antelope, C. Camel. 6. The Nile is the longest river in the world. A. True. B. False. 7. Africa has A. Many cold climates, B. Mostly hot and wet climates, C. Mostly hot and dry climates. 8. Which two oceans border Africa? A. Pacific, B. Indian, C. Atlantic. 9. The Rift Valley is one of Africa's deserts. A. True, B. False. 10. The Sahara is the world's largest desert. A. True, B. False. 'The land that is Africa has played a prominent role in shaping its people. In Part 2, we will look at Africa's long and remarkable parade of ancient civilizations. See how European colonialism in the last 200 years has affected its people. And learn about the cultural, ethnic, and economic features that define Africa's people today. Africa has a very long history. Archaeologists now know the continent is the birthplace of the human race. Homo sapiens, us, started in Africa and in a mere 100,000 years spread across the planet. Artifacts and skeletons from other, even earlier humanoid species have been uncovered only in Africa, including the famous Lucy. Lucy, seen here in a recreation, is one of the earliest complete humanoid skeletons ever found. These early people formed hunter-gatherer cultures. This changed in northern Africa around 4000 BC, when one of the world's great ancient civilizations started to grow up along the Nile River. It was the Egyptian culture, and it became the first nation the world was to see. At one time, the Sahara Desert was an area of lush grasslands and forests. Here we can see rock art produced by the early hunter-gatherers, depicting animals that once lived in this ecosystem that is similar to the one found in East Africa today. But as the climate became hot and dry, the people were forced to move toward the only reliable source of water, the Nile River. Here, people learned successful agricultural practices by planting crops in the river floodplain, a practice that is still carried on today. As a result of this abundance of food, a complex governmental system emerged based on a god-king called a pharaoh. Periods of rule by a particular pharaoh were known as a dynasty. The ancient Egyptians made significant advances, particularly in architecture, which resulted in the construction of the famous pyramids. The pyramids are actually tombs for dead pharaohs, and are truly one of the great wonders of the world. Inside the tombs were the embalmed bodies of these dead kings. In common language, they are called mummies. They are 4,000-year-old bodies that are remarkable today in their preservation. The ancient Egyptians also created superb objects of art, a written language, and the concept of a single god. They were one of the first to use metal to make weapons, and to build a large empire by conquering other people. The old Egyptian culture came to an end around 300 BC. At this time, Alexander the Great, a Greek conqueror, overtook the old Egyptian kingdom and built the port city of Alexandria, which still flourishes today along the Nile Delta. The last Egyptian ruler of this 4,000-year-old civilization was Cleopatra, a queen of Egypt made famous by the playwright William Shakespeare. In the latter years of the Egyptian Empire, the camel was domesticated and introduced into Africa. A camel can go 5 to 7 days with little or no food and water. Africans now had a way to transport goods such as gold, ivory, spices, weapons, and slaves across the vast desert distances. Camel caravans forged trans-Sahara trade routes, and new ways of life emerged, allowing people to live in the desert. This nomadic way of life persists today as one of the many traditional forms of living still in existence in 21st century Africa. The camel is sometimes called the ship of the Sahara. When walking, the camel moves both feet on one side of its body, then both feet on the other. This gait suggests the rolling motion of a boat, explaining the camel's nickname. The growth and advance of the Sahara Desert 6,000 years ago formed a barrier essentially isolating the people to the south, creating a region called Sub-Sahara Africa. The people of this region were, in effect, cut off from the Egyptian culture to the north. This region is comprised mainly of Black African people. During the period of isolation, a number of great kingdoms rose and fell in sub-Saharan Africa. Most notable was a culture that paralleled that of the ancient Egyptians, called Nubia. It existed downriver along the Nile in what are now southern Egypt and Sudan. The Nubians equaled the ancient Egyptians in accomplishments and longevity while retaining a separate cultural and religious identity. Descendant populations from the Nubian culture still exist in villages along the Upper Nile. According to their Islamic religious practices, men, women, and children are highly segregated in this society. These Black African people have more cultural beliefs in common with the Mediterranean people to the north than with the other Black societies to the west and south. Before the arrival of European colonists, Sub-Saharan Africa was dominated by a series of rich kingdoms. The Ghana Kingdom, which ruled from 500 to 1000 AD. The Mali, from 1200 to 1400 AD. And the Songhai, from 1400 to 1500 AD. These kingdoms were all in West Africa. Further south was the Zimbabwe Kingdom, which began around 1000 AD. The people of this empire built the stunning city-state called Great Zimbabwe. Early explorers were amazed by the accomplishments found here. All of these sub-Saharan empires produced major objects of art, architecture, and metalwork. Much of these post-Egyptian empires' wealth was based on trade with the Arab nations to the north. Over time, the Saharan traders became increasingly involved in human slaves. In the early 1500s to the middle of the 1800s, it is estimated that over 7 million sub-Saharan people were sold into slavery, primarily in North and South America and the Caribbean. This prison-like structure on the west coast of Africa is one of the places captured Africans were held until they were shipped to the Americas. Not only was there a terrible cost in misery and suffering for the slaves, but by continually taking away Sub-Sahara's most able-bodied men and women, the slave trade created a void in the economy that continues to play a role in Africa's development. At the same time, beginning in the 1800s, Europeans began pushing into Africa, first as explorers, and then as conquerors. The countries of Great Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, and Belgium essentially divided the entire continent into colonies under their rule. The process of colonization, which brought Africa under European rule, took a mere 20 years, from 1880 to 1900. As a result of this colonization, the native people and land were exploited to bring Africa's riches to the colonizing countries. Once again, the development of true African nations and their economic infrastructure was stifled. Colonization laid the groundwork for many of Africa's political problems of today. This is, in part, because the colonial borders did not respect previous African national and tribal boundaries. In the second half of the 20th century, the colonies declared political independence, but at a high cost. War, famine, disease, and illiteracy all combined to produce a weak infrastructure, hampering economic progress into the 21st century. Now let's look at Africa's people and its resources as they exist today. Africa's people are more diverse than the people of any other continent. There are over 1,000 ethnic groups, people who share a common set of beliefs and traditions. And there are over 800 languages. The derivation of these languages falls into two great groups: Arabic, spoken in the north, and Bantu in the Sub-Sahara. Three types of religions dominate Africa: Islam, Christianity, and traditional, ethnic. Islam came to North Africa in the 7th century and has been spreading southward ever since. Practitioners worship in mosques and are known as Muslims. 5 times a day, a Muslim prays facing the holy city of Mecca. Islam has no priest class, but leaders aggressively seek out new members. Christianity came to Africa right after its creation in the 1st century AD. New forms of Christianity were brought with the colonists and were adopted by many of the native people. About 50% of Africa is now Christian. 10% of sub-Saharan Africa still practices traditional or ethnic religions. Not much is known about these traditional practices, but they are sometimes called animism because of their close connection to the land, animals, and natural events. Africa still has a significant number of people living traditional lifestyles. We have already seen the nomads of the deserts. In sub-Saharan Africa, there are many hunter-gatherer cultures, such as the Maasai, with its strong warrior class. There are also sub-Saharan Africans who are nomadic herders. Many people live in small villages throughout all of Africa, but the vast majority of Africans live in cities, particularly along the coasts. Cairo, Africa's largest city, is a rich diversity of religions, commerce, architecture, and ethnicity. Like many developing areas around the world, Africa's people are fleeing from the rural countryside into large cities, creating both economic opportunity and urban poverty. Africa is becoming increasingly urbanized. The world's fastest growing cities are in Africa. Africa is a continent of abundant resources, fisheries, metals, oil, timber, and agriculture form its resource base. However, the colonial period did not provide the necessary political and economic institutions for effective resource exploitation. Without democracy and multi-party elections, it was easy for dictators to take power and rule the liberated countries. Dictators were often not interested in improving education or the well-being of their people. One of Africa's new breed of political leader talks about some of the challenges facing Africa today.
This country needs to have a free market economy, okay, where we'll have free enterprises, private companies should be allowed, foreign investment should be encouraged to bring in technology and foreign capital as well. And also Tanzanian investors should be encouraged. There has to be some deliberate policy to help local or rather indigenous business community.
One industry that does thrive in Africa is tourism. People come from all over the world to see the many ancient ruins, to enjoy the coastal resorts, and to view the magnificent wildlife. Many Black people living in other parts of the world travel here to discover their African roots. As Africa moves into the 21st century, it can boast such engineering wonders as the Aswan Dam and the resulting Lake Nasser. Another is the Suez Canal, which connects the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. But Africa also faces many problems, as its vast, ethnically diverse populations grapple with poverty and the creation of stable political institutions. It is the hope that the rich history and culture that is Africa will serve it well into the future. One, archaeologists believe human beings originated in Africa. A, true. B, false. Two, an early humanoid skeleton found in Africa is named A, Mary, B, Anna, C, Lucy. Three, the ancient Egyptian culture began along the A, Rift Valley, B, Congo River, C, Nile River. Four, the ancient Egyptian culture was ruled by a leader called a president. A, true. B, false. Five, the preserved bodies found in pyramids are called A, Nubians, B, pharaohs, C, mummies. Six, the people who use camels to cross the desert are called A, hunters, B, nomads, C, pharaohs. 7. The slave trade created a void in the African economy. A, true. B, false. Eight, Africa was colonized by the A, Americans, B, Chinese, C, Europeans. 9. Two important African religions are A, Islam, B, Buddhism, C, Christianity. 10. Most Africans today live in A, large cities, B, small villages, C, the desert.